important in the context of Carnatic. The idea of what is lyrics in music. Pretty much touched upon it in the beginning. It's a very interesting thing that Carnatic music, to some extent at least, is trapped in lyrical meaning, more psychologically and emotionally. But if you actually, the most interesting thing is if you actually look at the oldest notations possible of even a Tyagaraja composition, and I look at it, and you know Tyagaraja saw beyond meaning, because the structure of the composition itself breaks the word. Okay? I can show you hundreds of examples where it's impossible for me to sing the line without breaking the word. So what was the word? You know, in my book I call it a syllabo-melodic identity. And I think that is where we have to look at least certain forms, and not about all forms of music. We talk about art music. In Carnatic music, a composer is called a Vadyakara. And a Vadyakara is only one who composes both the music and the Vak. Vak can be translated as the word or that which is said. Now that which is said is a far better way to look at it. So, so the composer composes both, which means it's not a line of poetry to which a tune is put. So both these things are creations of sound. Creations of sound where the specific, the phrase, the macro, the raga, are in constant interaction with what is being pronounced as word too. So what happens to lyrics is it transcends the idea of meaning, of lyrical meaning, and it becomes what you call musical import. I don't want to use the word musical meaning, but you can call it musical import. So if you look at a lot of the compositions of the great masters, you will see definitely that they themselves have seen it far more than saying Rama come and save me. It was not about Rama come and save me. It was about what Rama did at that point. I can sing Rama in 15 days. The meaning of Rama is the same, but you will feel something different. And that's why. That's the answer to why it's not about lyrical meaning, it's about something else. And I think somewhere in the construction, modern construction, we lost that. If you take a tarana or a tilana, does it have emotional import? Of course it does. It doesn't have one word that has any meaning. But where is the import coming from? I think that too is an answer to, similar to what Aneesh was saying, that unfortunately in the Carnatic tradition, I think we regressed a bit. And we went back to looking, because of Harikatha and all the other complications, into looking at meaning. When, in fact, when we ourselves actually transcend it when we actually sing. But prefer not to talk about that.
Aneesh, what happened to bhajan? Bhajan was brought in onto the national stage, or say nationalist stage, in a big way, as a substitute to all that was considered vulgar, say Thumri, Dadra, Ghazal, something like that. And this is something uplifting, enlightening, and all that. And the reformers, as well as the musical establishment, put all their might behind it. And they still continue to some extent. But what happened to it? It didn't make much of an impact musically. It did not really alter the musical tradition as much as it was supposed to. So this was a failed dream. What do you think stopped it?
Well, I'm not too sure whether it was included merely to change or reform the system, so to speak, because both Hindu and Muslim ustads were singing song texts of religious import, whether Sufi or Hindu, and because some of them were engaged at temples. So, and you find that even in, for instance, Jaipur Gharana, they have many compositions that actually come from Haveli Sangeet. So the singing of song texts with religious context was always there. The religio-mystical context was always there. But the practice that you're referring to, yes. But the practice that Paluskar started, Vishnu Digambar Paluskar, and particularly, of course, he was a Ram Bhakt, and then he used that, his Ram related discourses, to also try to popularize Gandharva Mahavidyalaya. And one way of doing that was to present students of the Vidyalaya at every katha. And so, yes. So you had to have those students play in an ensemble of various kinds, whether instrument ensembles or vocal, and bhajan was very important in that discourse. And I think that then continued, let's say, to D.V. Paluskar and to several others, and they brought that into the classical framework. Because after, in a regular performance situation, let's say what was happening in the music circles earlier, you had khayal. By then, Drupad had waned in significance. So you had khayal, maybe one or two rags, and then you might have a thumri if the practitioner is a thumri singer as well, or trained in thumri. Then you have an intermission, and the same continues. Later on, there were other varieties brought in. Some Muslim ustads also brought in Marathi Natya Sangeet, because this was Maharashtra and a large part of the audience was Marathi speaking. So they brought that in. And some of them even brought in bhajan. But I don't think it was a conscious choice, because I think musicians, once again I'm saying that there's this creative impulse, in their silence, musicians often say many things, and sometimes they choose to go with the flow as well. And it happens today, it has happened in the past. Unfortunate part is that musicians in the past didn't keep diaries, so we can only surmise from what was happening. So the narrative that the middle class listeners were playing out may be quite different from what the practitioners were playing out.
But I'm not convinced, I'm not convinced that it's very interesting if you look at the whole Paluskar, Bhatkande narrative, and if you look at the South Indian narrative, there are a lot of similarities of what was happening, and they changed in different ways. But I'm not convinced that the musician was not conscious of the fact that he was playing, he was part, or he was subconsciously part of a religious nationalistic idea. I'm not convinced that the musician was not part of it. Now what is
I'm saying that of course musicians were conscious about the socio-political reality.
Yeah, so they were, what I'm trying to say is, I think they were moving their direction aesthetically, impulses, using the context that existed.
Possibly.
That's what I'm saying, because we are not talking about the moment of art when the context disappears. Now that's too precious to have a conversation about. But I'm talking about the whole process.
Yes.
And I think musicians always use the context and allow themselves the movements within the context.
Absolutely.
Because that's similar to what has happened in the South also, and it's happened in the North. I have a question for you.
But I think he also implies, in my opinion, that it was also part of their survival strategy.
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
They had to negotiate their way through.
No, that's what I mean by saying they kept conscious of the socio-political.
And also I'm making a difference between, let's say, the Paluskar, Bhatkande kind of
agenda.
reformers
That's an agenda.
and the hereditary musicians,
Yes,
the Gharanedar ustads.
That's important, because I think the Gharanedar is one who was addressed by Paluskar and Bhatkande.
Exactly.
They both were targeting the same people using two different narratives, but they were doing the same thing pretty much. And it's a similar thing that was happening where the Nagaswara Vidwans and Devadasis are being targeted in the South.
Right.
So in a way it's the same hereditary musicians that were being targeted in both contexts. My question for you, you mentioned it briefly about especially scenario of Maharashtra. I have a question for you, is through the years, with all the changes that have happened, do you think that vocal music today in Hindustani music has moved away from the practitioners from the Islamic tradition? Vis-a-vis, say, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. I'm not sure instrumentally that's the case.
In terms of song play?
In terms of practitioners, in terms of musicians,
the number of
vocals, I'm wondering whether it has. Because among vocalists, is it more a middle class Brahmin environment in Hindustani music vis-a-vis 50 years ago? And if it is true,